Hi, everybody, and welcome back to EBnet.Stream for this episode of Industry Insights. I'm joined by David Shochot, who is the Head of Corporate Solutions at 10X, and we're going to discuss what you all know as my second favorite F word. But before we get there, let's welcome David. So welcome to EBnet.Stream, David.
Thank you, Natalie. Lovely to be here this afternoon.
Okay, so my second favorite F word, everybody in the community will know, is fees. And you recently wrote quite an interesting article on fees in the context of retirement funds. And it was that piece that I actually reached out to you about, so that or to give us the opportunity to unpack that in a little bit more detail. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, perhaps you can set out an overview for the average person listening to this, an overview of retirement fund fees, be those standalone or umbrella, and perhaps just kind of introduce us to this topic.
Sure, no problem. Thank you for the opportunity. So I think really where I became also fixated on fees was when you realize that the long-term real returns that you can earn from a typical pension fund portfolio are pretty small. Looking at between 5 and 7% real returns over a long, typically working lifetime investment periods. And fees become important because you need to be quite adamant that you get your share as much as possible of the 5 to 7% real return so that you can retire in comfort. So the important thing is it's deterministic, it's clear, it's definite. A lot of the other investment variables are uncertain how the portfolio can perform. And if you can pin down and keep those fees low, that is, I'd like to say, half the battle won. So that's really been something that I've also fixated on in my investment career, ensuring that we can build portfolios that are efficient, effective, and meet member outcomes in the most appropriate and successful way.
It's so interesting. So it's almost, I'm hearing you say that fees are the one deliberate thing that perhaps a member or a retirement fund exercises some level of control over if you compare it to any other of the variables that impacts my ultimate retirement outcome.
Yes, that's exactly right. That is exactly right. As we know, and we've seen it this year, and this year is no different from other years, we've had a lot of volatility in investment markets, and very few of the economic and investment forecasts from the beginning of 2025 have proven to be borne out in reality. So we as humans or investment professionals have got very little ability to forecast the short-term machinations of the investment markets. But what we can do is be efficient. And as you say, from an investor's perspective, either the trustees or the fiduciaries or the members themselves, be quite clear exactly on what the fees are and make sure that they are sensible and reasonable.
We saw in this year's Sanlam survey, every year Sanlam produces their benchmark survey, which is quite a well-referenced document or piece of research for trustees and for our industry, really the retirement fund industry, to kind of benchmark and see what's happening out there. And in that survey this year, we saw admin fees increasing. And in fact, it was almost a motivation to consider, or I should say almost another motivation to consider an umbrella fund. So before we unpack what types of fees are there from an overall perspective or from a fee overview, is that your experience as well, that fees are generally increasing?
Well, I think the big factor has been there's a one-off industry change, as you know, the two-pot system, which required a huge revamp of admin systems across the industry. And I think, there's various estimates on what that's cost the industry, the service providers, and how that cost is going to be recouped over time. So I would guess that a huge chunk of that increase is the result of recouping some of the cost of the services, of the systems and people that were needed to implement the changes to the admin systems. So I think that has really been the major factor that's resulted in that pickup in admin costs.
So I want to put a pin in that two-part fee and swing back to it later. But let's delve into fees and let's look at the regulator's view on this. Now, I've attended a lot of industry conferences this year, and at almost every one of them, any spokesperson from the conduct authority is saying that the FSCA is committed to looking, in fact, they use the words increased scrutiny on fees. Have you heard something similar? What would your opinions or thoughts be around that?
Look, this is something that if you go back to the whole retirement reform, which was probably 20 years, maybe not as long as that, 15 to 20 years back. And that was the kind of the convergence of the different legal entities and fixation also on addressing the fees, which the FSCA has been speaking about for some time. So it's a very slow moving ship. And one would hope that there would be some scrutiny on this and education around how punitive fees and costs can be. But as I say, I don't see any radical quick changes in the imminent future.
So just perhaps maybe more of a supervisory and monitoring role to start. You know, we're looking at the Omni risk return and that type of information that they'll certainly have far more real time at their fingertips.
Yes.
And that will allow us to perhaps look through a little bit easier or allow more transparency. I'm getting a kind of sense from you, though, that fees are not legislated. So let's deal with that. So I mean, am I right in saying that an administrator of a retirement fund can basically charge whatever their customers are willing to pay?
Yeah, I think that's market prices, market forces will then come into play. And you can typically see probably at the lower end, I would guess 50 to 60 Rand per member per month, all the way up to probably multiple hundreds per Rand per member per month. So I think the difficulty is that you really do need a consulting expert to help you navigate through the different ranges of options that are available to you in terms of the fees, how they are levied, and administration fees is just one component of it. There's generally a consultant as well, and that kind of gets lumped together with the admin fees as a percentage of payroll. But you're right, there isn't anything legislated in terms of what the administrator can charge, but market forces have resulted in those fees being pretty low and at the lower end of the range, probably for the larger funds, 40 to 50 Rand per member per month, and sometimes even lower than that.
EBnet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it, and give us a thumbs up if you are enjoying the content. That way you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBnet. For more great content, please visit www.EBnet.co.za.
The other kind of urban myth that perhaps we could talk about at this moment in our conversation is that around this kind of idea that an administrator or a service provider charges you an obvious fee of 50 Rand or 60 Rand per member per month. But then if you look at page 79 of their SLA or of their new business proposal, there are perhaps other less transparent or less enthusiastically disclosed fees. I wonder if you could maybe comment on that. What are the words that a trustee or a management committee should look for in that type of contract or in any type of new business presentation or documentation they might be looking at?
Yeah, look, I think to be fair to the administrator is that the trustees or the company should be very specific and explicit in terms of what they're looking for. So, for example, how many pay points there are, how many administration report back meetings they would like, if they'd like minutes to be taken at the management committee meeting, and where do they need to have member education seminars that the administrator would need to facilitate. So I think you could get a very soft touch employer requiring with a one pay point with one specific location around the country. And then I think it can be quite easy to get a quote that is much clearer. But when you have a national company and you've got a lot more complexity around servicing, it does add to the workload on the administrator. And I think there what you ought to look at is the service level agreements in terms of what are the services, what are the explicit charges that have been identified for the services, and whether you're comfortable with that rate card.
Often an employer won't know what questions to ask, though. So, for example, you talk about multiple pay points, or we could talk about multiple contribution categories, or we could talk about multiple death benefit or different benefit categories. I mean, how do we meet each other halfway? What should an employer be talking about? In as much as what is the administrator's responsibility to ask for the information that they need to be able to quote transparently and as accurately as possible?
Yeah, so I think it's exactly as you say, is the benefit design, contribution levels, how complicated the special rules are. I do think, though, a lot of the time the emphasis on the management committee or the board of trustees would be around the costs related that have got an asset-based fee, because those become more material over time. So the administrator, correct you, it's not insignificant, and it is an important consideration. But I think the bigger consideration that a lot of the boards of trustees or management companies would apply their mind to is just understanding the complexity around the investment structures, the asset consulting, the meeting the benchmarks that they've been set, and how they monitor and measure the fees and costs around the investment side of the fund.
So from what you're saying, there is the administration fee, there is the consulting fee, and then there are these these investment fees or investment charges. Okay, so how would I know what is reasonable? Is there a survey I could go look at, like a fee survey, or how would I be able to take the temperature that those fees are reasonable?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, with a lay body of trustees that don't have any investment expertise or are not that switched on to industry norms, it is very difficult. And that's where typically the consultant would play a role. There would be, you could have, for the large schemes or the large employers, you would have a benefit consultant who would look at the design, contribution levels, drafting a special rules, or if it is a standalone fund, just looking at the inner workings of that particular fund. So that would be the benefit design consultant. And then there would be an asset consultant who would help navigate through fair fees, appropriate portfolio construction for the various member categories that the management committee is interested in. So I think it is difficult for them to gauge that themselves. The bigger you can look at there's a lot more fee disclosures in the public space on the unit trust side of things, which is more retail oriented. So you can get a sense for where the retail fees are, and then depending on the leverage you have based on the size of the fund, you'll be able to negotiate those down fairly aggressively. So that is either on your own or in conjunction with an asset consultant.
I'm so glad you used the word negotiate, because it was going to be my next question. How negotiable are these fees?
Yeah, I think it's I suppose would be true in any industry. The larger the player, the more the pricing power falls over to the client side, and they'll be able to negotiate lower fees. The smaller the player, the more they're going to be a price taker. So it really does work. So you spoke about no kind of industry maximum around fees, but I think the market forces are working pretty well in the industry. And I think in navigating through the different nuances with a benefit consultant for the design side of things and the construction of the benefit suite, and then an asset consulting for putting together an appropriate investment solution, they'll be able to help in terms of appropriate construction.
Sidebar, and it was about a comment you made earlier. And I'm going to put you on. I'm going to put you on the spot a bit. You spoke about the fees and the possibility that the increase that has been experienced in admin fees over the recent past has been attributable to two parts. And you spoke specifically about the recouping of capex expenditure into things like systems, possibly staff, that kind of thing. At some point, those expenses will be recovered.
Yeah.
Could we then expect a commensurate fee difference? How reasonable is that? And let's also bring into that this conversation around AI, right? Everywhere we read, it's about AI, invest your money in AI, all of those things. AI is going to, revolutionize, make everything efficient, certainly going to save money from what we can tell the narrative is from our service providers.
Yeah.
Are we approaching an environment where we may see a sustained reduction in fees over time?
Well, I suppose that is the hope as you move into a more modern age. But there is, in any industry which is subject to very high levels of regulation, that becomes with a lot of the bureaucratic processes that we need to go through. That does make it quite difficult to scale and automate. So you are hoping that the regulator would, if you look at what has happened in Australia with the superannuation funds, where literally you have got forced enrollment of every employed Australian, but they take that, it's more like an RA, but you choose your portfolios and you can import that from one employer to the next very easily. But that makes, because the regulation is quite scalable and the processing is very light in terms of the transference from one employer to the other, it makes it easy to use those kinds of new technologies to bring the cost down. But because we are still a pretty archaic structures in many ways, those corporate funds and a lot of the regulation around that and a lot of the admin processing around that, it does make it very difficult to see how you can, get the throughput to go through it as efficiently as you'd like.
We can expect, I suppose, legislation or regulation to perhaps change. I mean, everyone's talking about the Australian model, and so the regulators must be listening to that, and certainly looking at it. It's definitely a thing that is a barrier to financial inclusion, and so you have to imagine a future where there is something a lot more flexible, and perhaps a little bit more retailized. I don't know, but now we're getting ahead of ourselves.
No, I think that's right. Look, and I think it just comes back to the fixation that you need to have as the fiduciary or the management company looking after this on behalf of other people, is to be very fixated, as you say, on your second favorite F letter word, is on fees. It's just making sure that you have got as low a fee as possible. And I think that's where you've seen internationally this surge in the taking up of passive strategies, index tracking strategies, and that's something that we do at 10x, and there are many other providers in that space. And I anticipate an increase in market share amongst all the players in the low cost index tracking space, just because, as I say, as the long term real returns are leaner and less likely to achieve the type of returns that we've experienced in the past generations, it does make fees a very important factor to keep down.
You're 100% right. If I'm spending the money on fees, I'm not saving for my retirement.
Correct.
And extrapolate that over 45 years, it can be a significant amount of money. I mean, have you got any sort of real life numbers off the top of your head, or do we just go with it's a lot?
Yeah, look, I think that's, and it's not clear whether you can knock a full 1% off the fee, but if you earn 10% through your working lifetime of, let's call it 30, 40 years, not 9%. So that's the 1% difference. And it actually doesn't matter what the absolute levels are, the differences. So if you earn 4, not 3, or 8, not 7, at the end of a working lifetime, you could have 30% more money. So that's, that's a big number. That's 30% higher pension every month for the rest of your life, 30% more capital in your investment account. So it's a big, that 1% over a working lifetime is extremely valuable to save. And that, I think that is the lesson that's, been what the passive managers have been beating the drum around the world, and it's gained traction amongst the investors and amongst corporates, more so in the US and Europe than in South Africa, but starting to get traction in South Africa too.
So an interesting call to action for members of funds. So the trustees or the management committee can guard or can be vigilant around the fees at the kind of product level. But the member of the fund who chooses these underlying investments, they also need to be aware of the fees and kind of what that spend is perhaps buying or not buying them. Yes. And so that's a very big call to action and something to think about, particularly for umbrella funds, as they communicate to, underlying participating employers and members. I'm not sure I've seen fees of portfolios perhaps talked about as much as they should be, but the member him or herself can actually manipulate this by picking a different investment portfolio. So it's not just the returns.
Yes, no, exactly right. And I think we saw that as well, again, from the regulator in the default regulations, when the default, how to apply your mind as a board of trustees for the default portfolio where members do not make a choice. And there they have to, the trustees, there's a lot of points around that the regulator insists that the trustees apply their minds to in terms of consideration of passive in addition to active, and to be sure about the communication of all fees and costs to the members and to be aware of all the fees and costs. So the regulator is clearly, you spoke about the scrutiny of fees, the regulator is clearly aware of how impactful the costs and fees are and insisting that the trustees apply their minds to this when selecting the default portfolios.
But perhaps the members themselves aren't appreciative of the level to which they can, I don't want to say influence because they won't influence, but the kind of two sides of the choice that they need to make. It's not just returns; it's the returns and the fees that offset each other. And it's an interesting point. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, David. I appreciate your time. I'm going to let you go because I can see we're running out of time. But thank you for spending some time with us on EBnet.Stream today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and we'll chat again soon.